Welcome back to another YouTube video. It's your tutor, Miss Disha. Today, I'll be reviewing the CSEC Human and Social Biology examination topics for the year 2022. Let's get right into it. And the first topic I will be reviewing is the carbon cycle. What is the carbon cycle? So recall, the carbon cycle is a process in which the element carbon is circulated, and during its circulation, it can be used, reused, incorporated. Now, to illustrate the processes that occur in the carbon cycle, let's move on to a carbon cycle diagram. Here we can see carbon existing in its atmospheric pool in a gas called carbon dioxide, which is CO2. So it contains the element carbon covalently bonded to two oxygen molecules. Now, to start the cycling of carbon, what happens first is a process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis pulls carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, right? So what plants do, they combine carbon dioxide with water to produce sugars or food. And interestingly, it is through the process of photosynthesis that the element carbon is available for usage by other organisms, and these organisms are called heterotrophs. What happens now? When food is available from the process of photosynthesis, we'll have animals consuming the food, right? It is here that carbon gets incorporated into their body structure, or what we would call assimilation. So when we have death, what happens is the process of decomposition starts to occur, and this is carried out by microorganisms. And what these microorganisms do is they break down the dead animals or plants and release the carbon found in their structure into the earth, right? Sometimes some of these plant and animals will become fossil fuels, and this happens in millions of years. Now, apart from that, we also have the process of respiration occurring in the carbon cycle. So for remember, respiration now combines the food that was produced from photosynthesis with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. Now, apart from these biological processes, we also have anthropogenic activities which are carried out by humans. When they combust materials, that releases carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. How do they do that? When they burn fossil fuels to power factories, power plants, cars, trucks, right? That release carbon in the form of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We can also have carbon being cycled through the soil from the weathering of rocks, as well as when we have agricultural runoff or other processes, we have the release of carbon containing compounds into the oceans, right? And the carbon becomes dissolved into these water bodies. Not only terrestrial plants and animals release and use carbon dioxide, if you think about it, aquatic or animals and plants found in the waters of the earth, they undergo photosynthesis. Yes, algae, they undergo photosynthesis too. All right, so here's a high yield strategy for you, human and social biology students. You want to go to the examination knowing how to illustrate the carbon cycle and explain the various processes that occur in the carbon cycle. Before we move on, let's talk about the importance of the carbon cycle and how humans affect the carbon cycle. So the carbon cycle is extremely important. Carbon is a very important element that is needed for plant and animal survival. So it is the carbon cycle that provides this element, right? Ensures that it stays in the ecosystem so that living organisms can use it. We increase the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. We do so by burning fossil fuels that release a lot of carbon in the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, and that leads to global warming. We know that trees are very important in the carbon cycle. Remember, we said that it is the trees are the plants that pulls carbon from the atmosphere during the process of photosynthesis. But what happens when we cut down the trees? Deforestation, when we remove the trees, that is going to cause the increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because we won't have trees to absorb it. So guys, you understand now how you need to study? If they say carbon cycle, one, you must know the steps of the carbon cycle, the importance of the carbon cycle, how we as humans affect the carbon cycle, and you must know how to draw the carbon cycle. Moving on to the most anticipated topic, photosynthesis. Super easy. Once you know the site, requirements, conditions, equations, factors that affects its rate, you are good for the examination. What is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process by which plants, green plants, use energy from the sun to produce sugars. Photosynthesis occurs in the leaves of green plants, specifically in the organelle chloroplast. And the chloroplast contains a pigment called chlorophyll, and it is the chlorophyll that is involved in the harnessing of the energy from the sun to fuel this process of photosynthesis. Before we get into the requirements, conditions, and so forth, the topic photosynthesis, you must know the structure of a leaf and the structure of the chloroplast. They might ask you to construct diagrams of these two structures. There's a thing that students often confuse themselves with. They don't know the difference between requirements and conditions. They're not the same thing, right? When it says requirements, we're talking about the raw materials, what is necessary for the actual process of photosynthesis. And then we'll talk about conditions, we're talking about the environment, what fosters the process, right? As it relates to requirements, you must have carbon dioxide. That's the gas that's going to be used to synthesize glucose in the light-independent reactions. You must have water. Water is going to provide the electrons to drive the process of photosynthesis. And then as it relates to conditions, you must have an optimum temperature for the enzymes that fosters the process of photosynthesis to work, and you must have light. Of course, what is going to the examination without knowing the equations for photosynthesis? You want to know the word equation firstly. Carbon dioxide plus water. You write your arrow, and then you have glucose plus oxygen. And on top of the arrow, ensure you write light, energy, and chlorophyll. Light intensity, carbon dioxide concentration, temperature. Those three are what we call limiting factors. And we know that a limiting factor, that is something that limits the rate or the growth of something. As the light intensity increases, the rate of photosynthesis is going to increase, right? Until we have that area on the graph where photosynthesis stops. Similarly, as you increase in carbon dioxide concentration, that's going to increase the rate of photosynthesis. The carbon dioxide and the light intensity graphs, they are similar, but for the temperature graph, you're going to know its temperature is talking about. It looks like a bell where you have an increase in photosynthesis rate as you increase in the temperature, but it's going to stop at the optimum temperature and decreases until it stops. Moving on to the best topic, cell biology. We know that the cell is the structural and functional unit of organisms. A high yield strategy going into the examination is you must know the different organelles, found in plant and animal cells. There's the cell wall, and we know that this structure is only found in plant cells. The cell wall is a rigid structure made up of cellulose, necessary for providing support and shape to the plant cell. Next, we have a universal structure here called the cell membrane. It is found both in plant and animal cells. Unlike the cell wall that is made up of cellulose, the cell membrane is made up of phospholipids. And if you decide to do cake biology, and I hope you sign up for my class, then you learn more about that. The cell membrane controls what enters and leaves the cell. Next, we have the brain, or the control center of the cell. This is the nucleus, right? It controls all the activities of the cell, as well as it houses an amazing molecule called deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. We have the cytoplasm, which is a gel-like structure that holds the other organelles in place. And here too, we have several chemical reactions taking place. Next, the vacuole is that storage space in the cell. For plants, they have like a central vacuole. I'm going to show you. And then for animals, they can have many smaller vacuoles. Then we have another amazing organelle here called the mitochondrion. It provides energy for the cell to carry out its metabolic processes. Next, we have the chloroplast, only found in plants. Chloroplast, I just spoke about it during the process of photosynthesis, contains the pigment chlorophyll, which makes it green. And it is basically the photosynthetic machinery of the plant. Next, we have ribosomes. Ribosomes make proteins. Next, the endoplasmic reticulum. Mind you, you must be able to identify the two types of ER. There is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum and the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Why it's called the rough is because it has ribosomes on it. So therefore, the rough endoplasmic reticulum must be involved in the process of protein synthesis. Then we have the smooth endoplasmic reticulum that is involved in the synthesis of fats. Next, we have something called the Golgi apparatus, which is the factory of the cell. So whatever is made by the endoplasmic reticulum or other organelles, the Golgi apparatus is involved in packaging them, processing them, making them more suitable for their functions, and sending them to their destinations. Going to the exam knowing the organelles is not enough. You must be able to draw plant or animal cells. This is my drawing of a plant cell. I don't expect you to be perfect, right? But you should know it, look in your head. So when you go on the exam, you can reproduce a drawing, right? And you should know where the organelles should be positioned, their names, and their annotations. Okay? This is my drawing of an animal cell. Here are some common organelles found in the animal cell. Again, you need to know the animal cell, look in your head so you can draw it when you go to the exam. Okay? And then you must be able to compare or contrast differences and similarities between plant and animal cells. Plant cells contain one large vacuole versus the animal cells, there are more than one vacuoles, but they're smaller. And then for a similarity, you could say that the vacuole in both plant and animal cells, they're used for storage. Remember, only plant cells contain a cell wall, which is made up of cellulose, that's why it looks like this. That's why it looks like this, a rigid rectangular shape because of the presence of cellulose. Okay? No cell wall for animal cells, but they contain a cell membrane, and that's why they are so irregularly shaped. You have some look like a circle, some look like a oval, or so forth. Remember, plant cells, they have the nucleus at the side of the cell. See there? And then for animal cells, they have the nucleus at the center. Another structure here only found in plant cells, chloroplast, right? The chloroplast is dispersed all over the cell, as you can see. The photosynthetic machinery, they're all over the cells. But in animal cells, they don't contain chloroplast because we are heterotrophs. Moving on to the second topic, reproductive system. Recall, a system is made up of dedicated cells, tissues, organs, right? So we could say that the reproductive system is a collection of cells, tissues, and organs that all work together to achieve the purpose of reproduction or creating offsprings. All right, I did 2 drawings for you guys. And in so saying, I want you to go to the examination knowing how to draw the male and the female reproductive system. So let's start with the male. You want to know the different parts of the male reproductive system, right? We know that the overall function of the male reproductive system is to produce sperm for fertilization and to produce the hormone testosterone, which fosters the process of growth and development in males. So looking at my male reproductive system here, you can see I have the testes produce sperms and the hormone testosterone, right? We also have the epididymis, which lies on top of the testes. It is here where sperm matures. We have the vas deferens, which is this tube where the sperm travels through. We also have the scrotum, which is this entire layer around the testes. What it does, it surrounds the testes and provides an optimum temperature for sperm production. Over here, we have the penis, which is that organ that will enable sexual intercourse. It is that organ that is going to release sperm in the vagina during that process. But we have here the seminal vesicles, also have the prostate gland. These are some major parts of the male reproductive system that you must know for your examination. In addition to knowing the anatomy and physiology of the male reproductive system, you want to familiarize yourself with its structural unit. It is called the sperm. So you want to know how to draw the sperm and annotate the various parts. Sperm has a head which contains the nucleus, and we know that the nucleus is going to contain like 23 chromosomes. It also contains the enzyme chromosome, which helps the sperm to penetrate the egg. Also, in the midpiece, you can see numerous mitochondria, and the mitochondria provides the energy to help the sperm to use its tail to swim up the female reproductive system to reach the egg. It's moving over into the female reproductive system. Here is my drawing. Remember, you must know how to draw it. Look at the various parts. I have here the vagina. This is where sperm is going to be released here, and it will travel up the reproductive system to this area. It's called the uterine cavity, right? And this area is called the uterus. We also have here the ovary, which is the structural unit of the female reproductive system, and it is the ovary that produces a ripe egg that is released during the process of ovulation. When it is released, it travels down the fallopian tube. Also, you need to know the structural cell of the female reproductive system, which is the egg. You must know how to draw it, and you must know the different parts of it. Right, so let's move on to fertilization. So during sexual intercourse, the sperm is released into the female's reproductive system. Once the sperm reaches the uterus, it will join with the egg, right? Remember, the sperm has 23 chromosomes and the egg also has 23 chromosomes. So remember, there are 23 chromosomes in the sperm and there are 23 chromosomes in the egg. So when they join together, they're going to form what we call a zygote, which contains 46 chromosomes. When this zygote is formed, it's going to divide and multiply rapidly until it develops into an embryo, which leads into a fetus. There are three important stages of the birth process that you want to familiarize yourself with. Moving on to the next topic, diseases and their impacts on humans. So the first thing you want to familiarize yourselves on is the distinction between what is a disease and what is health. So we can have a normal human, and then we can have a state in which something is going wrong. Disease is a process in which there's a deviation in the normal functioning of the body. The World Health Organization states that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So they're saying to be healthy, an individual must meet all these three requirements, and any deviation from these means that there's a disease inflicted. Now, before we get into the different types of diseases, we want to familiarize ourselves with some vocabulary words that are common terms that the paper might ask you to define. Right? What is a pathogen versus what is a vector? What are signs versus what are symptoms? What is a parasite versus what is a host? What is an epidemic versus an endemic? All right, guys? So remember the disease terminologies. A pathogen is an organism that causes a disease. And we know that the microorganisms, right, like the bacteria, the fungi, protists. The vector now is the organism that carries or harbors the pathogen. So we as humans, we can be vectors, right? And we're going to see that when we talk about sexually transmitted diseases. Mosquitoes, for example, are vectors because they carry the microorganism pathogen that causes malaria. A parasite is an organism that lives and feeds on another organism called the host. Now, here's a common past paper question. The paper often asks students to provide a distinction between what is a sign versus what is a symptom. Symptoms are normally felt by the person that has the disease. Signs now are things that you see. Let's look at the various categories or types of diseases. And the first category here is infectious diseases. What are the causes of these diseases? These diseases are normally caused by microorganisms. An example of such a disease is measles. Measles is easily contagious, and it depends on the pathogen that caused these infectious diseases. Then that would create a treatment. If it is caused by a bacteria, then the treatment would be antibiotics. Next, we have hereditary diseases. It is passed down from one organism to another. Once the parent carries the gene for this disease, there's a high chance that the offspring will have this disease. Examples of hereditary diseases include hemophilia and sickle cell anemia. Well, I want you guys to go to the exam knowing the signs and symptoms of these types of diseases. Next, we have deficiency diseases. These are diseases that are caused by a shortage of a certain nutrient. If someone shorts protein, then they will develop kwashiorkor. Vitamin D, they're going to develop night blindness. Iron, they're going to develop anemia. And the final category of disease is sexually transmitted disease. What are these diseases? So these diseases are transmitted through sexual contact, and they are caused by microorganisms to include bacteria, viruses, and certain parasites. What are some examples of these diseases? Gonorrhea, syphilis, and chlamydia. These are bacterial diseases, so they are treated with antibiotics. The acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, which is AIDS caused by the HIV virus. Hepatitis and herpes. Lastly, you never know, they might ask you what are some effects of sexually transmitted diseases. They do have effects if left untreated. For example, if a pregnant woman develops a sexually transmitted disease and does not treat it, then that can affect the fetus or that can affect the baby when it's born. Some can even lead to infertility. The next topic is pollution. It is the introduction of toxic, unwanted substance into the environment, right? And these toxic substances, they do have adverse effects on the organisms found in the environment. A pollutant is an agent that causes pollution. Now, the two major types of pollution to focus on for the exam is air and water pollution. If you should talk about air pollution, what would be some pollutants that causes air pollution? The burning of fossil fuels, those release several pollutants in the atmosphere that can have adverse effects like the greenhouse effect and global warming. And for water pollution now, guys, well, you can have agricultural and domestic runoffs, agricultural runoffs from the farms around water bodies. That's another instance. So if you should talk about water pollution, you could look into some effects of the major one here, eutrophication, in which when we have different types of chemicals being released into the water bodies that increase plant growth and that kind of depletes the oxygen in the water bodies and that reduces the water quality. Similarly, for the air pollution has several effects or impacts, especially on humans, right? Air pollutants deplete the quality of the air, and that's going to cause some health related issues. All right. So for the final topic, the nitrogen cycle, I have done this in a separate video. Just click the link in the description and you can find the video for the nitrogen cycle. All right, so what you're gonna do now is to continue watching this video and look at these practice questions that I've placed for you. Good luck, and I hope you guys get a grade 1 like I did many years ago.